Hey kids, let's talk about the good old days, growing up in Idaho. Hello, welcome to the podcast. Happy to be back and getting back to the stories about growing up in Idaho. For those of you who have joined us the past few episodes, we've been talking about Harry Hicks, who grew up in the early part of the 20th century. So he was a teenager right around 1925 to 30. And today we're going to pick up where he's 16 years old and is deciding what to do with his life. For those of you who know anything about that part of the 20th century, you know that times were tough. And work was really important. And Harry was feeling like it was time for him to go to work and start earning some money. And so we'll pick up when he's about 16 years old. Here we go. In 1932, when I was 16, after a lot of contention with Salmon High School, I quit along in January. I went to work with Uncle Earl to get timber for our new house down by the old potato cellar, where we had bought a whole block from Daisy Andrews' estate. That's the entire block where Dr. Johnson's office is right now. And it ran clear back to the breaks, or slough, where Sim's old potato cellar used to be. We at first tried to get logs out on Kirtley Creek, but the country was too rough and steep, and there was too much snow. Here again, and several times after, I was to learn the superintelligence of a horse. I was doing the skidding with only one horse, it being rather downgrade to the head of the skid road. I would drive the horse along in a very near direct line as I came to each fallen tree. I would then take the chains and half hitch to another tree along the drag until I had 8 or 9 trees to drag, enough for the horse to handle if they began to run on him. Well, the trail got slicker and slicker as we dragged the logs over it. I failed to notice this as the horse came trotting up with the drag and slowed for me to unhitch. To my fright, the drag didn't come to a stop. I yelled, and throwing the lines down, I made a leap to get out of there, scared to death. I was going to be killed. The logs, racing toward the skidway, should have run under my horse, upsetting him and causing him to fall on the ends of the logs, and the whole kit and caboodle going over the mountain, which would be the death of my horse and the loss of those logs. But lo and behold, the horse jumped over the chain and took a dally around the standing tree nearby and leaned into the harness, so it brought the drag up to a dead stop and held them in place. Uncle Earl helped me untangle my horse as I told him the story of how we had been saved by the superintelligence of my horse. When we couldn't get our logs from under the snow, we went down around that big point on the left fork of Carmen Creek. My dad had not long before built that road for the Forest Service. We finished getting our logs out there. Later in the summer, I handled horses over in the Big Hole of Montana, including breaking my own saddle horse. I spent all that time breaking horses for old Horace Beach. I spent so much time on horses that summer that I began to think that was my role in life. Horace had brought up a bucking string from the last rodeo they were ever to have in Salmon until after the Great Depression. He was far-sighted enough to see the day when everyone would go crazy over horses, and he would run a sort of riding academy. The old man wanted me to break and get all his horses gentle enough so anyone could ride them. He had 15 head or so, and he paid me $5 a head, except for one I couldn't stay on. She threw me off every time I tried her. That one, he only paid me $3. At that time, I was about 16 and had fun riding with my pals, Otto Gasser and Del Pole. They were older than me and developed the saying, "Everything happens to Harry," because it did. One time, an old Holstein bull ran mile boring into the patch of willows along the old Mormon ditch. I remember that. I also remember the time on the steep hillside, he dove for his saddle horn and put my lariat around his foot and crawled into that old wash boulder tunnel up on the Kirtley Creek diggings. Well, sure, I had to pull him out by one leg with my horse and damn near pulled his leg off. There were some fun years in that section of my life. You know, reading stories about growing up in Idaho, like the ones I just told of my Grandpa Hicks during the early part of the 20th century, takes me back to my own childhood in the Salmon area. Some old-timers may remember Ed Corbett, who had a ranch south of Salmon, and he and his son-in-law Rex Tolman ran their cows on the Hat Creek Range between Chalice and Salmon. One summer when we were teens, my brother Mike and I spent a lot of time working up at Hat Creek with Ed and some of the Tolmans. I guess the best way to describe Ed was he was a man among men. He was a real cowboy. He was the kind of man who I'm sure felt more comfortable on the back of a horse than standing on his own 2 feet. He sat his horse like the animal was part of him. I'm sure you've all seen some men and women like that. Mike and I stayed in the cabin at the Hat Creek Ranch and got up early each morning and rode up to where the cows were grazing and herded them from one water hole to the next. The idea was to keep the cows close to water but move them so that there would be no overgrazing. Ed Corbett was a steward of the land, and he took pride in his management of those lands, along with his son-in-law Rex. And Ed Corbett was also a storyteller. Each rock outcropping had a name and a story behind the name. As we rode up to meet the cows each morning, Ed, in his low, gruff voice, for those who knew him well, rattled those stories off with resolve. His words made the land come alive and have personality, and it was intriguing. Herding cows all day was a great experience. I quickly learned how important it is to have a good dog along during those times we moved cattle. One night, after herding cows all day, we were headed back to the ranch. We were all tired and needed some rest. It was dark, and there was no moon to light our trail. So suddenly Ed pulled up and stopped it right in the middle of the trail. His horse looked around, wondering what he was doing. Then he said in that low, gruff voice, "Boys, we're taking a shortcut. Get off your horses and tighten up your cinches. This shortcut is down a steep embankment. If your saddles are loose, you'll be taking a quick trip to the bottom." I got off my horse and tightened the cinch. Then he said, "Keep your horses close, behind mine, and give 'em the reins. My horse knows the way, so just let yours follow mine. It's too dark to see, so there's no reason to be scared." My faith in God increased with each step my horse took down that steep mountain, with all that loose shale rock. The faith in my horse was already there. If you've ever trusted a horse to keep you alive, you know what I'm talking about. The next day I rode past that shortcut that Ed took us down. I could see the trail our horses picked as they followed Ed's horse, winding down that steep gully carved into the side of that jagged mountain. It was like a toboggan run, right down to the bottom of the hill. One wrong move by our horses would have meant, like Ed said, a quick trip to the bottom, and death, or maybe even worse. It was experiences like those at Hat Creek where I gained some of the best education of my life. Grandpa Hicks quit school when he was 16 and went to work. For a lot of folks in those days, work meant survival. Whether it was breaking horses or mining or ranching, it didn't matter as long as there was work to do. Survival and some level of prosperity were then possible. Stay tuned for next week for the last story in the Harry Hicks saga, when Harry meets Doris. Thanks for listening. Growing up in Idaho, the good old days.